Luke Macias, Sara Gonzales, and Charles Blain.
Hello, testing. There we go. It's on. Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming out. I have to say I was a little bit surprised to see so many people come out because I thought, maybe after the election last week, people wouldn't be as excited. But it's not really the case, is it? I'm Brandon Waltens. I'm the senior editor of Texas Scorecard. We've got three other folks that we've got here at Texas Scorecard. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation about the election last week, yes, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. I think we all know what happened last week. I think more importantly, we want to talk a little bit about what's next. What do we want to do going forward? What do we as citizens need to know in order to be effective? But I'm going to break that rule immediately starting out. And if maybe we can go down, I guess starting with Luke, we'll go down and a little bit of an introduction for yourself, and then what was one thing from the election last week that most excites you? And you're not allowed to say anyone who's here, I guess.
Yep.
Present company excluded.
Luke Macias, I've been involved in Texas politics since I was 16. I'm 34 years old and have run a couple hundred campaigns and work with Texas Scorecard and a bunch of conservatives all across the state of Texas, activists, donors, philanthropists, entities, organizations, leaders in the Republican Party to try to move our state to the right. And I get to come to y'all every week, and Texas Scorecard gives me the privilege of doing that with the Luke Macias Show. The thing I think, and I wouldn't say this is what excites me most, but I'm going to pick one particular remark, which is the Court of Criminal Appeals that y'all saw. We swept out all three incumbents. The thing I appreciated about that is that, typically within these judicial races, one guy's named Smith, the other guy's named Law, and like one gets 52 and one gets 48, and it's actually just like a study of which last names people like most, right? So that's a typical judicial race. And when some of these incumbents were losing 60-40, what that is the gap of educated electorate, right? So it wasn't just that they lost. They didn't lose by 1 or 2 or 3 points. They lost by 20 points. And that means that Texans all educated themselves and their neighbors to say, our judiciary has run amok. We're not going to empower George Soros-funded district attorneys. And all three of those incumbents lost. And we owe a huge debt of gratitude to Attorney General Ken Paxton for being willing to educate everyone on that issue. And then all of y'all, because I'm telling you, a lot of people who went to vote texted people in this room, right? And they said, hey, who do I vote for? And then you told them, here's the revolutionaries on the Court of Criminal Appeals, make it happen. So I think that was one thing. Sarah?
I'm Sara Gonzales. It's nice to see you guys tonight. And unlike Luke, I will not be telling you my age. So let's just get that out of the way right now. I've not been in politics as long as Luke, but since college, I was out there. I remember, handing out homemade flyers to people on campus who would just throw it away in the garbage, but that's okay, I tried. But I host a show on Blaze. It's a national show called Sara Gonzales Unfiltered. I did the news and why it matters for 6 years before we launched that show. And, what I so often say on that particular show is, guys, we talk about the federal elections. We talk about who's president so often, but does that matter the most? What affects you more? What affects your daily life more? It's always local. And I just felt very led to partner with Texas Scorecard to produce a Texas podcast called Come and Take It. We just did the first episode. It dropped last week. If you guys haven't seen it, I encourage you to go out and see it. But thank you. If we lose Texas, what's left? And by the way, what's up with Florida out-Texasing us, right? So I felt very led to partner with these wonderful people on stage and behind the scenes to really hone in on saving Texas and on explaining to the average person in Texas what is really going on that they don't realize is actually going on here in our state that they thought was so red. And it turns out wasn't the case. Now, after the elections, we're creeping back up, right? That was good news. But we're not done yet. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm with Texas Scorecard. I'm so happy to be with you guys tonight. And I would say the positive that I had was my race of Kronda Timich and Mitch Little. and Mitch was victorious. And I take personal pride in that because I volunteered so many of my hours out there in the parking lot, as so many of you have done, sweating. I got sunburned because I was not smart and didn't apply to my shoulders. And so I put blood, sweat, and tears into that race, and we were victorious. And I think Mitch, of course, Ken Paxton's lawyer for his impeachment, I think Mitch is going to really shake some stuff up over in Austin, and I'm so excited to see that happen. So thanks for being out here.
Well, and maybe Mitch won't kick you out of his meetings, right? Didn't that happen?
Yeah. Cronda kicked me out of her event with Governor Abbott. So I'm quite hopeful that I won't get kicked out of my state representative's next event.
Well, I haven't gotten kicked out of anything recently, so I got to step it up, I guess. So my name is Charles Blain. I host Texas Tomorrow with Texas Scorecard. We're a podcast that focuses on local government, what's happening in a lot of our cities and our towns across the state. Because if it's happening in one city or town, it's likely going to happen in your city or town, so we want to give you guys a heads up before it does. I also run an organization called Urban Reform, where we focus on free market policy, free market solutions to urban policy. So we look at what's going on in cities and try to get people more engaged at that level. I've been here for about 10 years. I am from the decently okay state of New Jersey. And so I'm glad to be here and glad to help in my little way. And I'd say the one thing I'm excited about from this election, which is kind of good and bad, is that we had a district attorney race in Harris County, and when our district attorney went to go vote, they told her that someone had voted under her name already. And so, yeah. So she couldn't
But voter
vote.
fraud doesn't exist, Charles.
Well, exactly, and thank you. No, and that's the point, right, is because in Harris County we have nothing but Democratic elected officials, and they often, discount voter fraud. They claim it doesn't exist. They claim that there's no problems with the election, and I think having this happen to a very prominent Democratic elected official in Harris County changes that narrative and at least pushes back against some of what they said. So while it wasn't good, I'm glad it happened because it proved what people were saying for a long time.
I think they call that karma.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about Harris County because no matter where you live, and we've got people, by the way, watching live on our stream, in addition to, of course, the folks we have here, but no matter where you live, I mean, Harris County is really in the driver's seat for a lot of what happens in Texas just because simply the most people live there, right? And so really, really important what happens there. I'd say probably for me, looking at what happened on election night in a lot of these elections, it was sort of interesting, was that, it was interesting to see, this was an election where you had a lot of people come in with endorsements, right? Governor, Attorney General, whoever. And those are certainly helpful, and they're interesting tools. But it seemed that for the most part in these races, and you tell me if you think this is wrong, but for these races, and you tell me if you think this is wrong, but for the most part, a lot of the voters were coming in there, and they might have noticed the endorsements, but they were coming in and they were voting on the issues, and they were voting for the candidates that were going to change the culture in Austin. That's, I think, a really, really positive thing.
I feel like the culture in the Texas House is the thing that sparked the energy that produced a lot of these candidates. Is the way I would say it, is that a lot of these men and women, and I talked to most of the candidates that ran for legislature across the state. Y'all are here, right? But a lot of people are watching, and there were a number of candidates who ran, and the issues that ended up being the drivers were maybe the fact that the Republican incumbent had voted for social transitioning or funding of social transitioning for kids in mental health facilities, or property tax cuts, or school choice. But when I asked them the question, why are you running? They would say, the impeachment trial of Ken Paxton, right? And so it is what opened people's eyes to then spur this broader conversation that Texans had. It nationalized the issues that we all talk about. We can all talk to our friends and our family about what's going on in Texas. It's kind of hard to make people care. And so what the impeachment did was it nationalized the broader problems we have in the Capitol.
Yeah, I remember writing an op-ed, I think it was the day before the verdict came out, and the title of it was What the Paxton Impeachment Trial Means for America. And the point was, if they can do it to him, that will be their strategy moving forward in every single state across the country, and they will work to overturn your vote, right? You voted for someone because you thought that they were the best person for the job. And it obviously is not the Texas legislature's position or job to overturn the will of the voter. And so it was obviously a calculation that if successful, everyone was paying attention to it, right? The left and the right. So if successful, it would have been used and weaponized against every single, not just attorney generals, but any sort of elected official that the establishment didn't deem good enough. And so it was a very, very big precipice. I agree with you, Luke. A very strong precipice in, kind of a turning point in waking people up. And I was very happy that I don't know if, us constituents changed people's minds or they just realized that it was the right thing to do. I tend to be cynical that they never realize it's the right thing to do. They just get enough pressure from people like y'all and decide that they don't want to hear from you later on. But I agree. I think that was one inflection point where Texans said, no, you guys have gone too far, and we know that you're slimy, and we know that you're establishment, and we know that you guys are a bunch of rhinos, but you're not going to overturn my vote. And we bolstered together, and look how many successes we had, and look how many runoffs we have yet to win. And I am very confident that we will win many of those.
Charles, I was thinking that with some of the changes that are happening in the legislature, there's going to be room for more policies that have to do with the cities. So I thought maybe you'd have some insight into some of the different policies that were not successful. I know we had kind of our big Death Star bill, so it might be good for you to overview. That's one that I feel like most people don't know a lot about. So what was the Death Star bill? And then secondarily, what are maybe some of the policies that we can pass from a statewide perspective that affect some of these blue cities?
Yeah. So Death Star, I think it was HB 2127, if I'm not mistaken. And what this bill did, what we're seeing in a lot of the cities is they're pushing their bounds and they're kind of doing everything they can, testing things out, whether it's guaranteed basic income or, I think we we have an Indigent Defense Fund in Harris County now. So they're testing different things out and seeing how far they can go. And so what the Death Star bill did was it kind of put a box around what they could do and essentially said that, if it's not explicitly provided that they can do this by the state, then they can't do it. And there are still some areas that I think would be good to be addressed. One of the big areas that I've been yelling about for a long time, and it's funny that you asked this question because on my way here, I was reading an article, and the article headline was, Texas leads the way in guaranteed basic income. And it's because we have not passed a ban on guaranteed basic income. And this is something that has been an issue for at least 5 years in Texas. It was tested in Austin. Then San Antonio did it with COVID aid. Then Austin moved from their test and fully implemented it. Then Harris County now implemented it. So you're seeing it bounce around, like I said at the start of this. Once one city or town does it, the other ones pick up and do it as well. And that's something that the state legislature really needs to act on because, one, it's unclear if they're even allowed to do this when it comes to using general revenue rather than COVID aid. But two, they just need to put a box on this because you're seeing it spread and you're going to continue to see it spread. I'm surprised Dallas hasn't picked it up yet. And so that's one thing that I'd absolutely love to see them tackle. And I think, with the new makeup, I don't know why they wouldn't.
When you mentioned Dallas, what is your kind of general observation about your big city mayors? So you have Eric Johnson in Dallas, who came out as a Republican, left the Democrat Party. John Whitmire, who's now the mayor of Houston, who ran against a much further left Democrat. So you seem to have, in some of these larger cities, the Republicans and more, let's say, moderate independents kind of teaming up to elect less liberal Democrats. What do you think the implication? Does that mean then Austin is like where all the bad ideas come and then the pressure starts down to the other cities? How do you see that when you're following the urban policy?
A lot of it does start in Austin. The city of Austin is more than willing to test out any crazy idea that comes from...
I don't claim Austin, by the way. I like to think of them as an island.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So a lot of it does come from Austin. I think in Houston, we did get lucky this election with former Senator, now Mayor John Whitmire, who cobbled together a coalition of Republicans, some independents, some older black voters and Hispanics to win this election against Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And, and I'm glad to see that because we don't know what would have happened with Sheila Jackson Lee as mayor. I can imagine, and it's not a pretty sight. And so I really think that when you look at the mayors, at least, we're only 90 days in Houston. He was just elected and just took office. But I would put Houston as kind of the top that's pushing back or at least holding the line against some of the crazy ideas. Then maybe Dallas. Well, no, definitely Dallas. And then San Antonio, but just before Austin. Like they're kind of, I've been seeing some stuff out of San Antonio that's the guaranteed basic income. They were one of the first to start it. So I would kind of put them in that order. And it's frustrating being in the city because, I look to surrounded by Harris counties, Montgomery County, and Liberty County. Fort Bend County's changed a bit. And, they're doing great things there, and we're struggling every step of the way. And so what I will say is that even if you guys don't live in the city, you should help out some of these candidates, help out some of the folks who are trying to work in the cities because we desperately need it. And what happens there is going to eventually, come to you guys, whether you like it or not. Sorry, but it's true. You're even seeing it in Houston move to places like Sugar Land and the Woodlands and other smaller towns around it. And so if you got some time or extra resources, please help us out in the cities because we desperately need it.
Just an aside, because you made me think of this talking about Austin. I think one of the most wild local proposals I had ever seen, this was probably a few years ago, it was a little bit before COVID, was the city of Austin City Council commissioned a study to spend $50,000. They're like, well, we need some sort of transportation, right? And a train, that's a little like played out, right? Everybody has trains, everybody has this. They did a $50,000 study to look into whether or not a gondola would be feasible, like at a ski resort, like a gondola going over the river. And I'm literally like, you're seeing they have mock-ups of it, and they're the little carts, and you're just imagining what high schoolers are going to do in it, and it's just bad. And they spent $50,000, and the study came back, and can you believe it? The study said it wasn't a good idea. So that's what that was maybe the one bad idea that Austin. I don't even know if they've just set it aside for now. Maybe they'll consider it again later. Sara, you alluded a little bit to this. I want to ask you. You of course you work for The Blaze. You have a national audience with that show, and so I'm interested. A lot of us are really focused on what happens in Texas. My question is, what do you get the sense is the perception from people who don't live in Texas about how things are here?
I think the problem, I would say, is that they give Texas a little bit too much credit, and they give certain lawmakers in Texas a little bit too much credit because there are a lot of optics that are being played, and those of you who are in the know understand what I mean by that. We've got a couple buoys in the water deterring migrants, illegal immigrants, but there could be more, right? There's a really good optics at Eagle Pass or Shelby Park where people can take pictures, but other than that, there hasn't been Texas National Guard that's come in and seized any particular areas. And so I think that lawmakers here in Texas have been very careful to create the sort of optics that makes it look like they have done a lot more than they actually have. I'll give you another example, property tax relief. Wow, gee, thanks for the tiny, minute savings when in actuality, I still never own my home. How ridiculous is that, right? But they were able to champion it and take victory laps and say, we gave the biggest property tax relief in Texas history. Well, that's only because you never gave us any. That was kind of a low bar to begin with. And so, I think that they have been very careful and I think deceptive at times at crafting the narrative to make the rest of the nation, who's not really paying attention, they don't live here, they don't know, they just see the headlines. So the rest of the nation is like, oh, wow, Texas is really, taking on the border issue, and Texas is really tackling property taxes, and Texas is really doing all of these things, when in actuality, when you eat, live, and breathe this stuff, you see that it's not quite the case. Maybe they'll tackle 5% of an issue when we need the 95%, the rest of the 95% tackled. And so I think that that's what I've been seeing. And you guys correct me if you disagree, but that, from my perception and from what I cover and the angle that I cover it, that's typically what I see. Like, people would be shocked to hear that we have representatives who are voting, as Luke pointed out, who are voting to give hospital grant money to hospitals that socially transition children. They're shocked when they see the videos that I go out and take of drag shows for children, of these sexually explicit shows for young children. They're shocked because they could not imagine, they couldn't wrap their head around the fact that that would be happening in Texas, and not just Texas, very, very conservative areas of Texas. And so they are very, the more I think evidence that we can put in front of the rest of the country's faces to show them not all is as it seems in Texas, and certainly we need to come together and save it. We're not too far gone yet, but it won't be too long before we are. And so that's really what I see from a national level.
Yeah, and Luke, I want to ask you, because probably there's no bigger issue that there's a divide between like the actual voters and the people that we have in Austin, other than the fact that the Texas House currently, right, awards leadership positions to liberal Democrats. Texas is, y'all know this, right? Texas is the only Republican state that does this. Is that changing anytime soon? Do you think it is?
I mean, I will tell you that I think members in the Texas House think it is. And even members who have for a long time defended the practice, if you talk to them, will tell you we think Democrat chairs are on their way out, right? It's an indefensible practice, and their excuses basically ring hollow. So the excuses, they all have their talking points, and so they say, well, we're not going to pass any constitutional amendments, right, if we don't give Democrats 8 chairmanships, which is what they do. But the problem is that Dan Patrick doesn't have any Democrat chairs, and he passes all the same constitutional amendments they pass. And so we know that that's just not a fact, that that's the way Democrats operate. The practice of awarding Democrats chairmanships, I think, is on its way out. The fact that we have a parliamentarian in the Texas House who's an Obama lawyer and basically gives the Democrats these wins to kill all of these conservative Republican bills before they can even get voted on, I think is a practice that's on its way out. The reality is that Dave Phelan basically made all of these Republican members take these really antithetical positions to their voters, and it's cost them. And I think the members are getting increasingly tired of it. And so what you have is this coalition of conservatives who are demanding it. And then I believe a lot of a Republican caucus that's just tired of fighting it. And so you are likely to see that practice end this session. I would put money on no Democrat chairs.
I just wanted to add a story real quick to this idea about kind of the perception of Texas. So, like I said, I'm from the decently okay state of New Jersey, and I was back home. This was probably like 2.5 years ago, and I was back home, and I was at my friend's house, and I was also watching the Houston Archaeological and Historical Commission meeting, as one does when you're visiting friends. But I'm watching it, and they call this guy up there because he purchased a building in a commercial area, but it was also a historical district. And he started painting it because it had graffiti all around it. And so he started painting the 3 sides. And then he got to the facade and started painting the facade. And then he had a nosy neighbor who didn't like it and called the city. The city came down. They red tagged him, said he has to come in front of the commission to kind of explain himself. And so he's there explaining what he's doing and was just saying how he was trying to contribute to the neighborhood and just trying to make this eyesore better. And they were like, well, you know, under this whatever ordinance, we have the power to tell you what color to paint your building. And he's just sitting there. I mean, he was just a regular citizen. He didn't have any, resources or allies with him. He was there by himself because he thought he could do that. And they were like, we can tell you what color to paint the building. And he's like, okay. And then the guy who called 311 or called the city to complain on him was sitting in the front row just absolutely giddy that this was happening. And then they called him up, and they were like, what color do you think he should paint the building? And I don't know what color he said, but he said the color. And then he goes, and under the ordinance, you guys can also tell them what color to paint the grout. And I'm like, this is unbelievable. And my friend, he's like, this is in Texas? I was like, yeah. I was like, this is in Texas. And it's just mind-blowing that these things happen. And that's stuff that the state could put parameters around because, I mean, it was kind of heartbreaking to see this guy go through this thinking, I mean, maybe he should have brought a lawyer or someone with him, but he thought he could just go down there and advocate his case and completely got shut down. And this is happening all over the state, not just in Houston.
And I want to add something, to the conversation about eliminating the Democrat chairs. Can we, normalize saying no to bipartisanship? I'm so tired of hearing the argument at the national level as well as at the state level, well, we have to have bipartisanship. Well, look at this bipartisan bill. Yeah, you're sending all of our money to Ukraine. You're spending all of our money on this omnibus bill, and it's got all these pet projects for all of these. I think the last one, there were 6,000 earmarks, Rand Paul said, on this last spending bill that they just passed. It's ridiculous. And I feel personally, I'm like, I don't really want to hear about bipartisanship when the other side has gone so far to the left, so far radical that they're talking about chopping off children's body parts, that they're talking about all of these, they're talking about abortion up until the point of birth, they're talking about all of these radical positions. I don't really want to compromise with that party. I don't really want bipartisanship with those people.
I think The way I would say that, Sarah, is I think here's how you do bipartisanship in Texas. You basically bring forward the bill that says you're not going to chop a kid's genitals off. And then you say, any of you Democrats want to vote for it?
Exactly.
And then when 2 or 3 of them are like, yes, you're like, bipartisan.
Exactly.
Right there.
Exactly.
Agreement, okay?
Yeah.
And that's the only type of bipartisanship I'm on board with. You know?
This is the Democrat Party now, though, to your point. You did have at least one Democrat who did vote for that and did vote for the bill to prevent pornography from being presented in children's libraries. And they're in a runoff. They're attacked by the Democrat because if you vote for one of those bills, you have no place in today's Democrat Party.
So her name is Sean Theory. And Charles can give us some insight because it is in Houston. But Sean Theory is the Democrat female who stood up and voted for the ban on sex change surgeries on children. And then she voted for the bill that would have removed pornographic material from school libraries, right? And gave speeches for it. So Democrats just absolutely hated her. And she's in a runoff. Charles, you're kind of there on the ground. So what are you seeing in Houston?
Yeah, it's frustrating because, like you said, she got up there and I watched that speech she gave she was crying and kind of going through why she was voting the way that she was, and then everything was disregarded by her party, and they were like, well, she's just a bigot. That's the only reason, no other reason. And so now she's in a runoff, and a tough one, because all of the Democratic elected officials in Harris County are gunning for her because they know that there's blood in the water and it's an opportunity. But the sad part is that the district, the makeup of the district, they're older black folks who agree with her. She's been going out during the primary, was going out to a ton of events, was still very welcomed by people, but they're spending so much and working so hard against her. And, some Democrats are afraid to block walk for her because then they're going to be, pushed out and not be welcomed. And so she's in this really weird position where you still have a community that supports you, a district that supports you, but you're not being able to break into them because of all the noise surrounding it. And so it's frustrating because, she took a very tough vote for her party, and now she's being punished for it. And, if more Democrats are willing to step up like that, I think they'd be in a better place. But,
Brandon, what are the other policies that you think are on the docket for next session as a result of some of the conservative victories on election night?
Well, you look at the obvious ones, right? What were a lot of the campaigns about? Well, certainly when the governor came in, it was about school choice, right? You had people like Glenn Rogers, who was probably the staunchest opponent of school choice, right? And he gets defeated. You've got Justin Holland, who's in a runoff, who's likely to get defeated in May in his runoff, somebody who has been against school choice. So I think school choice, right, at least if you're Governor Abbott, that's probably priority number one. But just talking to voters, I think there's a lot of people who have been excited or have been encouraged by what they've seen on the border over the last several months compared to what they've seen over the last few years. But there's a lot more that can be done, right? And they know that there's a lot more that can be done. Did you know the Texas House had a bill, right? It was a bill that the speaker called a priority. He said, this is a priority bill, and we're going to create a border protection unit in Texas. And then he killed it. He allowed Democrats to kill it. He killed the bill. Right, scheduled it for the last day that bills could be filed or could be presented, and then killed it. That's not what you do with the priority, right? You don't put a priority on the very last day. But that's what he did, and then we never saw anything done on that. I think that when they come back, they've got to do something on the border because we're barely stopped. We're not even stopping the bleeding, but we're kind of a little bit stopping it and sending the blood to Arizona and California. This metaphor is falling apart, I think, but they want to see more done, right? So border security, education, ending Democrat chairs, I think it goes a long way towards that. And property tax elimination, right? How sick are we talking about property tax reform? Property tax reform. We're never going to have, we're supposed to have a surplus, rather. We're supposed to have a big surplus going to the next session. But when was the last time we had a $31, $32, $33 billion surplus? And less than half of that money went to new property tax relief, rather. And so I was encouraged to see on those, Republican ballot propositions, right, at the end of your ballot, just to see the overwhelming amount of Republican voters that say, look, we want to actually see property taxes eliminated. And you actually have people out there talking about it with real plans and real things. That's exciting.
Sarah, you were in, I feel like people here and most people watching did not live in the Mitch Little Kronda Timish district. And so what they don't know and these people do to some extent with Glenn Rogers, but my calculation says Kronda Timish broke a record, and I think she spent over $2 million on her reelection. And that's how scared they were of this Mitch Little guy, who I think they should be scared of. So what is it like when you live in a district like that and somebody's spending $2 million? I don't even know what it's like to experience that in such a small area.
Complete chaos as a summary. Yeah, I mean, that race in particular was a lot more, dysfunctional because they both also went to the same church. Now, yeah. Now, they tried to hold that against Mitch at one point, and it's like, you can't say someone can't run for office because they go to the same church as the current representative. That's not a reason to not run, all right? But there was a lot of tension. There seems to be a lot of bad blood on part of Karonda Timich's campaign, staff. They were not happy, and his platforms. Border security was at the top of the list because what he said was something that I just said a few minutes ago, which is, yeah, we've done something, but it's not enough. It's not stopping the problem. It's a teeny tiny Band-Aid for a giant open wound. And so that was the point, of course, that he was making. And they tried very hard to try to say, oh, Mitch Little is a liberal, Mitch Little is this, Mitch Little is that, and he just completely outgamed them. I mean, it was just. He put up billboards that were like, vote conservative, vote Mitch Little. He really, it was masterful to watch him work it was all about showing up, having volunteers at the polls and volunteers engaging with the voters. Because that particular race we won by, I think, like 300 votes.
Yeah, this is a really good point to make, and a lot of you in the room have done stuff locally as well, but Mitch Little lost early voting 48.5% to 51.5%. And so when that hit, all of us were kind of like, okay, this is going to likely be a disappointment like
not me.
We had with Mike.
I held out hope.
Sarah believed. But Mitch Little won Election Day with 57% of the vote, right? And so that's what basically flipped. And I was talking to his campaign. They were literally saying that their volunteers knocked almost 2,000 doors in the last 48 hours of that election. And I remember Matt Rinaldi, who's our current state chair, and he defeated Bennett Ratliff, who was this liberal Republican in Irving. And at that, like literally, I remember calling Mike Alcott. I'm going to tell you all this story. So I called Mike Alcott, and he was in that district, and he had like driven people in from here. Some of you might have been with him, 5 or 6 of them, and they're block walking from Matt Rinaldi, who won by 60 votes that election. And so this was the Monday before Election Day, and we started getting calls. I was running the campaign at the time, and they're like, there's this hooded man knocking doors. It's dark outside. People are scared. Like they think he's going to rob them. So I call Mike, and I'm like, Mike, are you knocking doors with a hood on? And he's like, yeah, it's cold. And I'm like, Mike, stop. It's like 10 o'clock. Like you're waking up people. They think you're robbing them. And he goes, Luke, I'm here. I can feel it. It's close. And I'm like, I know. You're losing us votes. Like, if you're going to keep knocking, tell them you're for Bennett Ratliff, okay? Like, I need you to stop. He's like, I'm telling you it's close. And so then election night, we win by 60 votes. And Mike's like, you tried to get me to stop block walking.
Yeah.
We got this. I won. I told you I flipped 5 people after dark. And I'm like, I believe you. I believe you. Okay, raise your hand if you wish. I want to test for political consultants across the nation. Okay, raise your hand if you feel like you didn't get enough direct mail in this election. No? Not one? I was thinking 1 or 2 people would just be like, I could have used 1 or 2 more.
I'm not even in that competitive a district, and I still got stacks of it, right? Isn't mail, just by the way, and this is a dig at campaign consultants everywhere, I guess, isn't it an amazing thing that it is legal in this country, and our government facilitates it, that you can take trash from one place and then send it to somebody else, and then you have to go throw it away yourself? Could you just mail bags of trash? Would they do that? I don't know, but there was a lot of mail this cycle. I even saw a Glenn Rogers billboard on the way in. I guess he's probably figuring out what he's going to do with that. Yeah.
That one didn't age well.
Yeah, take it down, doctor. But by the way, I don't have to be like me. If anyone wants to jump in with a question, I don't want to monopolize.
Well, I wanted to say one other thing on that race, just going into the runoffs. Okay, the Timich staffers on Election Day. I was out at the polls almost all day. On Election Day, I think the difference, as Luke pointed out, the difference in the percentages, we lost early voting or they lost early voting, and Timmich lost on election day. These people were not motivated. They were paid. I can guarantee you they were paid staffers who were paid to show up and hold a sign and say, vote Kronda Timmich. And the difference that you guys can make being active in these runoffs and actually showing up and volunteering your time because you're passionate about making Texas better is going to be the difference in a lot of these runoffs. The people at the polls know it. They can see it. And so I would just encourage you guys that it's just something that I saw. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I was looking around and I was like, they're not even trying. I was walking down the parking lot trying to make sure to hit every single voter who was walking in, and I'm like walking back and forth, and they're just standing there. And I was like, what are they doing? They must have just thought they had it in the bag. And then I went, oh no, they're paid. And then we found out that some of them did admit that they were paid that day. So it really goes to show you, to Luke's point about how close it can be. Grassroots can make all the difference if we activate, and I would just encourage you guys to do that through the runoffs, and let's put the pedal to the metal and get this thing, this thing done.
Yeah, speaking.
Wait, Brandon.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just to say the same thing on the municipal level, I mean, it's crazy how important it is. And it's actually more crazy how people in your orbit may know you're political, may know that you're very active, but don't go vote themselves. So I'm in a group chat with a bunch of friends. Some are political, some aren't. And I told them who to vote for in our November municipal election. Runoff comes in December. I get a text from my friend. He's like, hey, do I really have to go back? And so the next message in there was Charles left the group chat because I did not want to be there. So, but no, I mean, it's so important because in our runoff, our district city council members, which we have 11 of, represent 250,000 people each. Our at-large council members represent the entire city, so 2.1, 2.2 million. And we had 2 at-large races that were decided by less than 200 votes. One of them was for the first black Republican elected to Houston City Council. The other one was for a Hispanic prosecutor out of the DA's office, who is a Republican Hispanic prosecutor who was running. We had some district races, not this cycle, but last cycle, that were decided by 27 votes. And so, I mean, it's so important. The return on investment for just shooting a text out to everybody in your phone contact list or, I don't know, your email list or whatever is just so high, especially in the runoffs or in the municipal elections.
But tell them who to vote for.
Yeah.
Because I can't tell you how many people I saw at the polls and they're like, nope, I'm voting straight ticket Republican all the way down the ballot. And I'm like, no, wait, let me give you this voter guide before you go in. So
I'm going to slightly shift gears real quick. Show of hands. You'll get some participation here. Okay. Raise your hand if you are concerned about the Californians moving to Texas. God, okay. I knew I needed to say this. Okay. I need to dispel a rumor and a myth here, okay? So, Californians are going to save our state, okay? Understand me. Californians are going to save our state, okay? So, more Californians voted for Donald Trump than Texans. Did you know that? In 2020, more Californians voted for Donald Trump than Texans. And so we registered between 2020 and 2022 1.3 million people in the state of Texas. The vast majority of them moved here in the last 5 years. That is more than the 17 smallest states have in total registered population. So I think we registered 2 Montanas or something in a year and a half, okay? Which just shows you how pathetic those other states are, right? And we can't help it that they're just not impressive people. And so, but year and a half ago, and we're probably going to do something similar, and so y'all can keep your eye. I'm sure Texas Scorecard will have a story on this probably in the fall, okay? Probably September timeframe. So keep your eyes on the site. In September, you'll probably see a similar research study on the newly registered voters from 2022 to 2024. So Texas, we talk about Texas up here. It's 6 to 8 point. I would argue a 10-point Republican state, okay? But we're not a 37-point Republican state. We're not a 20-point Republican state. When you look at the newly registered people between 2020 and 2022, about 65% of them are Republicans, okay? And over 70% of them want to ban sex change surgeries. 70% of them say illegals shouldn't get your taxpayer dollars. 68% say we should eliminate property taxes. So you have to understand that Californians are going to save our state. And the problem is we're using our own taxpayer dollars to create the Marxists, right? So we build the institutions with colleges and K through 12 institutions that create Marxists. So we have created the Marxist factories, and then we're trying to ship in enough liberty-minded Californians to make up for the Marxists that we're paying to create. So that's something that Mike Alcott, y'all can talk to Mike, and if it's still happening in 2 years, kick him out of office. Wasted space. Better deliver. Anyways, I only say that because y'all are going to have a lot of Californians here, but if you meet a Californian who moved into Parker County, which I think there's probably a lot, you need to understand, like, these are people you need to pull into your churches, pull into your communities, get involved, get them here. They want to fight. They probably want to fight more than your neighbor who's lived here for 30 years because he thinks everything's fine, right? So just keep that in mind. Hey, Charles, I want to ask you about just, again, urban policy, looking ahead. You come to people every week and talk about some of these things, but what are any interesting urban policies you see, and are there any cities out there that are kind of on the verge of Republican to Democrat that end up being a bigger conversation regarding Republican urban policies that get enacted?
Sure. I want to make a comment on the population thing first, though. I mean, Luke is right. You got to pull these folks in and educate them, work with them. Last year, 2022 to 2023, 500,000, I think it's like 487,000, but 500,000 people moved to Texas. Does anybody want to randomly guess what the fastest growing county in the country by rate, by percentage rate is? For 2022, 2023, it was Kaufman County. So, it's...
And just tell people where Kaufman County is if they don't know.
I don't know either.
Okay, Kaufman... Well, that's helpful. Thank you. So, Kaufman County is just east of Dallas, right? So this is just east of Rockwall County, if you all know. Super fast-growing county, evidently. I just learned something as well. I at least know where it is, Charles. Okay, Charles, tell us some more facts that you don't really know. Okay, go ahead. Please.
So it is rapidly growing, and today the census released the metropolitan numbers, and I was looking at this county, and they said it increased about 4.5%, roughly 8,000 people. And then I went and looked at the recent election you guys had, and some of those races. I think there was a constable race that was decided by a handful of votes. So these people matter. When you educate them and pull them in, they can make the difference. And so I'd encourage you to do what he's saying. Now, what was your actual question?
Other cities that outside of the big cities, because I think when people think urban policy, they think Houston, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth. What are like the middle cities that matter more? I feel like there are certain cities where their urban policies might be a little more Republican. So kind of give us an idea when you look across the state, different urban centers that matter more for a statewide perspective.
Yeah, I think when you're looking, it's usually the cities or towns that surround the bigger ones, because that's where the people who want to flee all the overregulation go to, and they kind of vote that in. So I know in kind of the North Texas area, I know Louisville is one. I was recently looking at some of the stuff they're doing in terms of land use regulations and things like that. The Houston area, you've got Sugar Land, you've got the Woodlands, which isn't technically a city, but for the purpose of this conversation, we'll count it as that. I'm not really sure of the ones around the San Antonio area, but around Austin area, Bastrop County. Is it Bastrop or?
Yeah, Bastrop.
Okay. Because all right. Bastrop
You're doing good,
County.
Charles.
It's
right by Kaufman. It's not.
It is not. It's not at all.
Okay, continue. Bastrop, yes.
It's a lot of these cities that are in what's called the Texas Triangle that connects, our major cities, which from 2010 to 2020 had, 20 million people moving to it. By 2040, they're expecting 40 million people to be in it. So it's a lot of these smaller unincorporated areas of counties and these smaller cities surrounding these major areas.
I want you to explain that one more time. So I want you to explain the triangle and just the amount of sheer population growth, for people to kind of understand what we are headed towards in Texas, timeline and population growth.
Sure. So the Texas Triangle, so Houston, Austin, San Antonio, if you count them as one kind of major metro hub, and then Dallas, and so it kind of makes a loose triangle. And so this area is where you're seeing a lot of the population growth. And in that area, most of it is happening in the smaller towns and cities and in the unincorporated areas of those counties because it's cheaper, you can do what you want, people aren't, breathing down your neck all the time. And so from 2010 to 2020, that region saw an increase of 20 million people. I think it was 20.7 million people. From 2020 to 2040, by 2040, they're expecting 40 million people to have moved into this region. And, those are loose estimates, but that's what they're expecting. And you're seeing some response to this. I recently wrote an article about a town-ish called Snailbrook that is in Bastrop County that Elon Musk is building largely for his employees, but we saw similar things like Clear Lake in Houston was built that same way. The Woodlands, which is now the 32nd largest city in the state, was built the same way. So you're seeing things like that happen in unincorporated areas where they're kind of the conglomerates of people are moving. They're kind of putting resources usually through special purpose districts or something like that, and it's just blossoming and booming. But they're doing so without the oversight or the burden of an actual municipal government. They're doing it through unincorporated areas and things like that. So it's booming.
Yeah, well, I feel like Parker County, right? We know about the expansion of the Metroplex, right? I mean, I was born in California, but that's a good thing. He said you can't make fun of me, but so like we're saving the state or something like that.
You're saving our state.
You guys are the type of refugees that we want.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I grew up, sort of northeast Tarrant County in Keller, and 20 years ago, like Parker County, like was not even on the radar. Like that wasn't part of Fort Worth, and now it's just all blending in. You see that in Austin, you see that in San Antonio, Houston. So it's just really interesting to see just how much that spread is. But you have to be vigilant, right? Because we've seen in some of these districts. I'm thinking specifically of some districts around Dallas, but you see this in Houston too. Where you might have a legislative district that's red, and then and it's more of a suburban district, and then you start to get Democrats in, right? Collin County, long thought to be a Republican stronghold, has a Democrat state representative now, and so just sort of shows you how important that is. I want to ask I think if we can go through a couple of sort of forward-looking things and run down the line here before we wrap up, and then we'll do some Q&A afterwards, but. Looking forward, next thing on the calendar is the runoffs. Sarah, you pointed out, I think correctly, that they might have been caught a little bit by surprise during the election last week. They're not going to be caught off surprise in the runoffs, right? They're going to work hard, right? And so it's fun to celebrate a little bit, but isn't now the time to really double down?
Absolutely, yes. And make sure that all of your neighbors and friends and family know that going to the primary is not enough. You got to show up at the runoff. Otherwise, what was the point, right? What was the point of showing up in the primaries in mass if you're not willing to double down whenever the runoff happens? And I would tell you this, I mean, when you look at the numbers, probably Luke or Brandon are the ones to really hone in on the specifics. But when I was looking at the numbers of a lot of these runoffs, I mean, if everyone showed up and voted for the opponent who made it to the runoff rather than the incumbent, and you add up all of those totals, we would get a lot of those seats. If not, are there any that we wouldn't?
No. Yeah.
I mean, if you add up all of those, so it's like we would get all of those if we can just get that type of enthusiasm. But that type of enthusiasm is going to, of course, come with, like you guys, word of mouth. Trying to encourage your friends, trying to encourage your church, trying to bring people to go vote. I was like, hey, who needs a ride? I'll bring you up to the polls to make sure that you vote, because this is the time to really put the pedal to the metal and let the House know. They're scared. We want them to be like trembling. Okay, so we have to be engaged through these runoffs and make sure that everyone else knows. Maybe you're the person who was in Charles' group text that Charles left because it was so offensive. Yeah. Make sure that those people know, okay, you showed up for the primaries, but if you really want a reformed Texas House and a Texas legislature, we've got to show up en masse and really send a message that, if you're a rhino, you can get the hell out.
Then my next question I want to ask you, Charles, looking in November, with general election, right? And so that's a lot of national attention. We've got the presidential race. We could probably spend an hour talking about that. I don't really want to talk about that per se, but I do want to ask more broadly. Harris County used to have some Republican people in the county government, right? And they were not exactly tip of the spear conservatives, but they had an R behind their name, right? Is that trajectory... Is it becoming more blue? Is it becoming less blue? Is it something else? What's your feeling on the direction right now of Texas's largest county?
Yeah, I mean, I think as things get worse, people are starting to look for alternatives. So we had like Brendan said, we used to have Republican elected officials, lukewarm Republican at best, but they were Republican elected officials. And we had a Republican-dominated commissioner's court up until 2018, Republican district attorney up until 2016. One of those districts that you were speaking about that flipped was barely Republican. That was 134 with Sarah Davis, but but then that's the thing. She was barely Republican, and the Democrats still took her out. They were like, we don't even want her.
She was endorsed by Planned Parenthood and
yeah.
lost. She was like, I swear, I'm basically a Democrat. They're like, no, you're not. We're going the other one. Yeah. We're going further.
Right. So from then we kept seeing this trend, more blue, more blue, more blue. In 2020, 2022, we saw our first kind of clawback with some judicial races in Harris County. I think maybe 4 of them we had win. And at the same time, we had a county judge candidate who was running, Alex Mueller, who came, I think it was 1.5, 2 percentage points away from actually winning from our very popular in the Democratic field, County Judge Lena Hidalgo. And that gave some optimism. I mean, we were kind of excited about that. This primary, and we were kind of excited about that because the county had gotten so bad, some Democrats decided to cross over and vote for Republican, which we were completely shocked by. I mean, it was really remarkable. But then you saw this Democratic primary where we had a district attorney who went against our party. She indicted senior staff of the Democrats in the county. She's done a number of things that really aggravated her party. And they ran someone against her. It was a George Soros-funded candidate who beat her 60-30. I mean, she was an incumbent. She was a 6-year incumbent, and they beat her. And so you see things like that, then it's like, oh, well, maybe we're not going the right direction. So I think people are getting frustrated. I think with this shift in the in the DA's race, because if we're being honest, it's an uphill battle for the Republican district attorney candidate in Harris County to win. So in all likelihood, the Democrat will probably win. And so if that happens, I think we're going to see things get significantly worse and people are going to get more upset. One of the things that was really mind-blowing during the 2022 election was that at Commissioner's Court, we started seeing a lot of older Black and Hispanic folks coming because they were crime victims, and they were like, you guys keep releasing these people out of jail, and they're coming back to our communities and hurting us. Like, where do you think they're going? Or we can't call the cops and report them because we're worried that they're going to go to jail, get a PR bond, and then come back and be in the community and come after me. So you're seeing different demographics of people who have not traditionally voted for Republicans start to look that way. And so,
Charles, can you explain to people what a PR bond is,
in
case anybody doesn't
personal
know?
recognizance bond. So a problem we've had in Harris County is that prior to 2016, a lot of folks were getting arrested, and people were getting arrested and not being let out on bond. They were being held on really high bonds. And so the Democrats sued, saying that this was unconstitutional. And a federal court agreed. There was a settlement, and all this to say they did bond reform and the judges started using their discretion in letting out people on personal recognizance bonds, which essentially means they don't have to pay to get out. They deem that they are too poor and they are let out. And there are other conditions, but a lot of them violate those conditions. There have been people who've been given ankle braces who later on finding out that they violated, their where they were supposed to be like dozens of times and never got picked back up. You see stories on the news all the time of people being crime victims of someone who's out on 4, 5, 6 of these bonds. And so this is something that's been happening for the last 4 or 5 years, and I think people are really getting frustrated with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're running out of time a little bit now. But like I said, we'll do some Q&A, but I want to just ask one last question, go down here. It's 2 parts. 1, what are you working on? Where can people find you? What you're working on? And 2, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who was maybe just now activated, they're just now getting active in politics this cycle?
Let's go with Charles first.
Yeah, we'll go with Charles. We'll bring it down, yeah.
What am I working on?
I just wanted time to think about what my answer was.
Yeah, you just...
I just want to be honest with y'all.
Was that a good one? Well, I was going to do that or like your biggest fear, but I thought maybe that was more relevant.
Not interested. Okay, go ahead, Charles.
Some of them I'm working on now. I mean, we have endless issues where I'm from, and so we have this upcoming proposal. And actually, I'm going to turn to the state level after this and hope you guys fix this problem. So we had a long-running issue with our firefighters. It was like a long dispute, a 7-year dispute, and it was finally resolved today. But part of that settlement is a $650 million bond that they're going to give them as a settlement. And this $650 million bond, they're doing it as a judgment bond, so they're not bringing it to the voters. The city council is going to approve it, and then a judge will sign it. And so I'm hoping that you guys can push some state legislators to make sure that cities can never do that again after this. But so that's one of the things I'm working on now is kind of trying to break that down. And then the second question, if someone was new, what they should do I'd say watch your city council meeting because you would be blown away by the things they do and they say in there. City council, your commissioners court meetings, and I think even more importantly, it's a lot of these boards and commissions which are given a lot of authority and no one watches what they do. You know, I watch them online and you'll see like one person and that one person is me. And there'll be no one in the room. And they do wield a lot of power in cities and towns, and they go unchecked very often. And so I would say check those out, and then maybe even serve on one if you want. But I'd rather hold them accountable from the outside.
So obviously you can find me all over social media at Sara Gonzales TX, working on this brand new podcast with Scorecard that I mentioned previously. Come and take it. I would encourage all of you to subscribe to that. I would also encourage you guys to follow the work that we're doing over at Texas Family Project. We've just uncovered a new drag show that children are being led into in Fort Worth. Yes, it's happening in places like Fort Worth more often than anyone cares to admit. And so we're doing a lot of work trying to root that out. We're trying to put pressure on these establishments to change their policy. I mean, the one that's happening over the weekend, it's planned for Sunday, it says, we suggest that you guys don't bring your young children because this is like really raunchy, but any age is allowed. It's fine. Imagine being fine with the sexualization of children. So I'm working very closely with Texas Family Project as well to try to, root that out and prevent the sexualization of children in Texas. So subscribe to my podcast, follow my work there. And what am I?
If you're brand new, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I might be a little bit biased, but I would say there's really no other news media organization in the state of Texas to follow that's going to tell you the truth than TexasScorecard.com. And I would encourage you to go there.
Yeah, she was paid a lot of money to say that. I refused. No, I'm kidding. What was the question?
What are you doing now? Where can people follow you?
What am I doing? Okay, Luke Macias Show.
Plug yourself, Luke.
You can follow that on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or where you get your podcast. My goal is to give you less than 30 minutes. Every now and then I go over it, but less than 30 minutes. The most important things you need to know about Texas news, Texas politics, Texas policymakers, Texas campaigns. And so I'll try to do that every week, and I'm really grateful that I get to do that. And then just working with a ton of people all across the state of Texas to try to continue to move our state to the right, both electorally, within the elected official bodies, within the Republican Party, which we didn't even get to, but there were a ton of Republican Party victories, Williamson County, Montgomery County, Denton County, all these counties that previously in the past had more moderate leadership at the Republican helm now have strong conservative Republican county chairmen and precinct chairs. These are grassroots people that have stepped up to lead our party. So I would say our Republican Party as an institution is more conservative than it ever has been. And so that's work that's being done all across the state. So I'll just continue to work in and around with all of that. What you can do if you're new is, of course, very easily stay plugged in. It takes you really like an hour or two a week. If you just subscribe to the Texas Minute, you're going to get an email every single day that gives you the top news stories you need to know. And then you can subscribe to whatever podcast that you want and consume a little bit of information and then come to this once a month. And if you just do that, you're now basically in the 0.1% of most educated voters in the state of Texas. Okay, so I basically just gave you a recipe that takes about 5 hours a month, and that makes you the 0.1% most educated people. And then after that, you're going to have a lot of other opportunities open up. The bar is not that high. It's not a hard entry. And then at that point, you're going to take one step further, and you're going to actually build a list of people that are going to listen to you and do what you tell them to do, okay? I'm going to make this super simple. It's not hard. It's people in your church. We have a representative republic, not a democracy, which is a real blessing. We don't do these stupid statewide ballot referendums where everybody gets to rewrite the Constitution based on showing up and casting a vote like all these other states do. We actually make people once every other year show up, or every other year in their city council or whatever, and be engaged. So if you're more engaged, you're going to know a lot more, and then you're going to be able to lead people to further engagement. Brandon?
Absolutely, yeah. Just so I'm going to do the survey thing so I can get an idea. How many of y'all like to listen to podcasts to get your news? Good amount of you. How many of y'all like to watch shows, and maybe that's through video? Okay, some of y'all as well. The good news is you can do both with daily headlines every day at Texas Scorecard, where I go over the news. So that comes out at 5 o'clock. We go over the big stories. But, more seriously, more importantly, I think, piece of advice would be, thinking back. Remember when Trump said you're going to get tired of winning? Yeah. Are any of y'all tired of winning yet? No? Okay. That can be a real thing. But I think more importantly, right, is even when the winning doesn't happen or the winning's not so immediate, we need to not be tired of fighting, right? A lot of the successes and a lot of the victories we saw, not just last week, but we've seen in the legislature over the last several years, isn't because they just happened super easy, right? They didn't just happen one day because, in many cases, lawmakers or somebody woke up and said, we're going to do the right thing. They happened because people kept fighting, right? Whether it was constitutional carry, whether it was some of our pro-life victories we've seen. You can go through a list of these, and for every one of those issues, I can tell you that there were people just like me, maybe even some of y'all in this room that were tireless and that were fighting for years and years and years because they didn't get tired of fighting. So that would be my biggest piece of advice to people who are new. Again, I want to thank y'all so much. We're going to end this live stream right now, but thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for having us here in Parker County. We really, really appreciate getting to do this first Texas Scorecard